lineup of panelists and speakers tonight. And I'm really excited for tonight. I've been planning this webinar for quite some time, and I'm really glad that these people have agreed to join us tonight just to share some of their insights, to speak a word or two from God's word as well to us. So really looking forward to tonight. First and foremost, before we get on the way, we've got quite a lot to get through in the next 1 hour. But first up, I want to introduce to the stage, to the virtual digital stage, my co-host for the evening. She's a member of faculty here at Ridley College. She's also my supervisor. And she's Ridley's very own educational designer, and that is Diane Hockridge. Hey, Diane.
Hey, Wayne.
How you doing?
I'm good.
That's great. That's good. That's good. So I'm just going to unpin myself here so that I'm not always the big guy on screen. So could we just start off by you telling a little bit about who you are for some of us who don't know you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, as Wayne just said, I'm faculty at Ridley, and my job is I'm the educational designer. So that means I spend a lot of time developing online courses. And I also have a sort of a role in general teaching and learning, just getting people to think about how we can do our teaching and learning well at Ridley.
Cool. Now, not many people may know, but you, as the educational designer, first and foremost, you actually are not based in Melbourne.
True.
As many people actually have mistaken.
Yep.
You're based in the outer suburbs of Sydney.
Yes. Well, not the outer suburbs, the mid suburbs.
The mid suburbs.
Yes.
And you operate mainly from Sydney, and that's where you work. So you've actually worked remotely for a long time now, even before you've started work here at Ridley. But at the same time as well, you also lead a team, an online team of people, not just remotely from around Australia, but also from around the world as well, like tutors from the UK, tutors from America, just all over the shop. So you obviously have a lot to contribute in this area. You've got a lot of expertise and experience in remote learning and remote working. So maybe let's start off. Could you give us a sense of where we're at with the whole isolation and remote working thing, given that we do have restrictions easing in the country, but as the government has said, as our Prime Minister ScoMo has mentioned, if you can work from home, you must work from home. So we are probably not seeing remote work to go away anytime in the near future. So just give us a sense where you think remote work and learning is heading.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. Yeah, it's been a really interesting time, hasn't it? This last couple of months with the lockdown and everyone suddenly having to work from home, and so many of us have had big changes in our workplaces. And so that's the reason why we thought it would be helpful to have a webinar like this, because pretty much everyone I know has had those big changes. And so we're all asking a lot of questions and dealing with a lot of issues and challenges about how do we make this work. And I think now, as Wayne just said, we're sort of starting to transition a little bit. Some people are going back in some ways to some workplaces, but there's a lot of talk out there. I've been hearing a lot of stuff about what is it going to be like in the future, and what is going to change, what might we take with us from this time into the future in workplaces, what are the things we want to leave behind. So hopefully we'll address some of those questions tonight. And as I've been reflecting on it and just listening to what people have been saying, I've noticed sort of some big themes coming through that, again, hopefully we'll talk about tonight. So one of those is the whole issue around boundaries of our work when we're working from home. How does it work, especially when there's other people around?
Yeah.
And there's a whole lot of ethical issues as well that are coming up. There's challenges because people's homes aren't equal places. We all have different kinds of homes, different access to technology, different challenges and all that kind of thing. it's also raised a lot of those gender inequalities that is sort of coming up, and there's been some interesting articles on that recently. There's a good one by Annabel Crabb on the weekend. And just the whole question, I suppose, that I hope that we'll talk with Cara about a bit later on, about how does our work relate to our sense of ourselves and our identity and what we think is important. So hopefully we can think through some of those issues tonight.
Yeah, it's good. I actually remember, like I've done some remote work myself. I've got a background in animation, and after I left university, that's the only job you could do, is you do remote gig work from home. And I have to say, looking back now, I realized that I actually didn't manage my own emotional situation that well. Just spending all that time in isolation at home and not taking care of myself, not just physically, but emotionally as well. So maybe, for those of you out there who you've been working at home 24/7 and just not, just really struggling emotionally, maybe we can delve into some of those themes tonight.
Yep.
Cool. So where does that leave us now?
Where does it leave us now?
Yep.
Well, yeah, I think, I suppose I think, as I said, there's a lot of things that we can probably take from where we are at the moment, and think about, okay, well, how can we make the most of the opportunities we have when we're working remotely? Just a couple of practical ideas that I've found helpful over the years. So, as we mentioned, I've been working from home remotely for over 6 years now. I think one of the key things that I've found really helpful is just thinking about the different ways that we can communicate and what ways of communication are good for different purposes. So I do a lot of email. We probably all do a lot of email, probably more than we want to do, and that can be good for some things, but email is also not great for other things.
Yep.
So sometimes it's really helpful to think about what is a good form of communication. Actually, rather than sending 15 emails and asking Wayne to do something tomorrow, I could just pick up the phone and have a 2-minute conversation. And I've noticed, talking to a lot of people, that there's been a lot more standard phone calls happening in these last couple of months as we've all tried to think about ways of communicating. So those kinds of things, I think, I've been reflecting on, that the importance of choosing the right form of communication, and that boundaries question too, because when you're working remotely and from home, you've really got to work out those boundaries for yourself. And obviously you have to negotiate them with other people that you might be sharing your home with as well. So, where does my work start and end in terms of time? One of the ways I've found to manage that, and it doesn't work for everybody, but mostly it's worked for me, is I tend to sort of try and have standard working hours, so that I work, sort of office hours roughly. And I sort of have a little ritual at the end of the day too, when I'm usually sort of signing off. My husband's working from home now at the moment too, so we've got into the habit the last few weeks we always go for a walk at the end of the day, just to sort of get out of the house and make that break.
Yeah.
All the little things like that I think are always quite helpful.
That's really good advice, Diane. So I think it's probably about time we bring up our next guest.
Indeed. Yes. So I think one of the things I might have mentioned a couple of minutes ago is that whole idea of what is our work, what actually is work, and what isn't work. How do we define that, and how do we think about that as Christians? And someone who's done a lot of thinking and talking and speaking and writing about this whole area of how we understand work and faith, how we think about our work theologically and biblically, is Cara Martin. So Cara used to be on faculty at Ridley a few years back. She was the Dean of the Marketplace Institute, and she's written a couple of books about work, Workship 1 and Workship 2, and the third one is in process at the moment. She does a lot of speaking and teaching for a number of different institutions. So, Cara, are you going to appear and say hi?
Hi, Cara.
Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So,
Cara, I didn't realize you've got a third book coming.
Oh, yeah. I've been
Oh, wow.
working really hard. I'm right in the middle of writing it right now.
Wow, there you go.
so give us your thoughts, Cara, about what is work? Is there a distinction between what we might call secular work and kingdom work?
Oh, one of my favorite topics. Yeah, well, I think in terms of work, when we say the word work and we ask people, do you work? Mostly what we actually think about is paid work. That's where we start. And we also often, when we think about work, there's a bit of us that goes, oh. If you think about synonyms for work, I challenge you to think of a positive synonym for work. Often what happens is we think of negative things to do with work. But all of that actually means that a lot of our understanding of work comes from the fall, comes from a time when evil had entered the world. It's a negative view of work that's informed, I guess, by a Genesis 3 type concept of work, which is that work is cursed. But we need to go earlier than that. We need to start right at the beginning of the Bible, at Genesis 1, to see that God worked, and he worked in a magnificent way. He worked in a way that was superlative. He was able to bring things out of nothing, and he created everything. And then he created human beings in his image. So we're actually made in the image of a God who works. And right at the beginning there in Genesis, we see that the very first thing that God asks human beings to do is to work, is to steward the creation that he has put together, and to continue with that process of creation, of filling in the things that have been created. And then in Genesis 2, we have this beautiful picture of God taking the human being and putting the human being in the garden to work in the garden and to take care of it. And then slightly later, there is some really different sort of work that's taking place when God asks the human being to name the animals. So we have this picture of work as being a positive thing, a very natural thing, part of what we were created to do, something intrinsic to what it means to be human. And we actually work alongside God. We're in this work project together in terms of this creation. So that's the sort of work that I want to sort of grab hold of. I think a Christian view of work sees work in that positive light. And that's work is not just what we're paid to do. Work is anything we do with intent or purpose. Then, of course, we do see that work is impacted by the fall. But we should never say that work is cursed, because if you actually read what happens, it's the ground that is cursed. So it's actually the process of working that is cursed. Work is harder than it had been before the fall. Work is more difficult. We struggle with work. We have to work by the sweat of our brow. There are thorns and thistles that interrupt and frustrate our working. But work is still a positive thing. Work is still something that can be seen in a positive light. And we know that. There are times when we love working, when we enjoy work. We get a great deal of pleasure and meaning out of work. So I think the biblical view of work is actually that work is something that was designed to be a good thing that is impacted by the fall. So we shouldn't be surprised when things don't quite go right, or we have working relationships that fail. But it's intrinsically a positive thing that we need to do, that we should do, and we should find some purpose and meaning in. But mostly we need to remember that it needs to be aligned with what God is doing. And when we do that, I think anything we do actually becomes kingdom work. Anything we do that we do with a heart of wanting to honor God and serve other people, I think you could term kingdom work. There aren't those sort of distinctions that we might put on between sacred and secular. Those sort of distinctions and divides are actually much more due to Greek philosophy than they are to a biblical view of work. In fact, God describes himself as a worker over and over in scriptures in quite ordinary jobs. So that's a biblical view of work, and hopefully everyone's encouraged that whether it's changing a nappy or doing housework or doing some volunteer work, helping out in the community, or reading the Bible in church. All of that is kingdom work.
Yeah, thanks, Cara. That's a really helpful perspective, isn't it? Just to see everything we do as being our work for God and our work that can reflect Him. So you mentioned before, about the impact of the fall and how often our work can be challenging now. What do you think are some of the particular challenges and perhaps the spiritual challenges, perhaps, of working remotely?
So yes, I think we're actually one of the best people we can learn from here is Paul. Because if we think about what we have in the Bible, we see that Paul worked remotely a lot of the time. Not by choice a lot of the time, but he writes these letters. And I think from those letters, we can pick up some of the challenges that we might have as Christians trying to work remotely. One of those things that we notice in his letters is he's always relational in his letters. And that's something I think that can sometimes get lost a bit when we're working remotely. You've said the importance of communication and communicating well, and I think that is absolutely important. But sometimes when we're working remotely, we can just reduce it down to the functional stuff that we do. Yeah. But we notice that with Paul, he doesn't start off and then just like go hammer and tongs at stuff. He often starts off with greetings. He often mentions people by name. He makes links with the people that he's talking about. He often mentions how much he's been praying for them. And at the end of his letters, he often has a list of people he wants to thank and hopes to connect with again, and so on. So I think those relational things are really important when we're working remotely, to remember that even though this is technology and we're separated from other people by a screen, that we have to, in a way, reach through the screen and connect with people and still treat them like human beings and not just as some sort of objects to enable us to get our work done. So I think that relational thing is really, really important. I think the other thing is that I notice in Paul's letter in working remotely, which I think is probably a distinctively Christian thing that we can do, is first of all, go from a base of our own relationship with God. So go from a basis of a well of connection with God in terms of reaching out to others. So I've heard a lot about Zoom fatigue, and yeah, I felt it quite a bit as well. And thank you everyone for being here when you don't have to be. But I think that what we learn from Paul is that he was constantly re-energizing himself through God, connecting with God deeply. And then he talks from that base of that deep connection with God. And that's something I think spiritually we need to do. Even though sometimes it feels like at home this should be our safe place and comfortable place, we can still get exhausted, we can still get tired, and we can still get actually quite spiritually distant from God. So we need to stay connected with God. And I think the other thing that Paul does is he allows himself to be vulnerable. So in his letters, you'll hear him talk about his struggles. He's real with people. And I think that's a really important thing as well. Sometimes when we're working remotely, we just want to present the best of ourselves, the best part of ourselves. But I think a distinctively Christian thing is to actually be vulnerable about the challenges we face and some of the difficulties that we face. And then allow God to work through that, through our weaknesses and our struggles.
Do you think, following on from that, that there are particular challenges for working, if you're a Christian, working in a predominantly non-Christian or secular environment?
I guess there are. I mean, my research for my third book, thanks Wayne, that I'm focusing on has shown that the most important thing we need as Christians is to have spiritual practices that connect us deeply, intimately with God. We need that deep and rich foundation that we see that Paul has, that spiritual maturity. So we need to make sure that we're connecting in deeply with God. And that gives us a strength, an energy source, and a resilience that actually sustains us. And particularly, I think it helps sustain us from the temptation that we might have to go for those work idols, whether it's workism, just working way much more than we ever should until it depletes us, whether it's ambition that's out of control, that's more about what we can achieve for ourselves, or it's the constant challenge that we might have for our identity to actually become merged with our work, which I think is wrong. As Christians, our identity always needs to be firmly in Christ. And when we begin to identify ourselves much more with our work, then we can get slowly, just subtly trapped into that way of thinking where our identity is much more in our work than it is actually being in Christ. And at that point, our faith, I think, becomes a little more vulnerable.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. Thanks, Cara.
Thanks, Cara. Do you mind if I just chime in here, Diane?
Yeah, please do.
So we do need to bring on our next panelist, but I actually had wanted to just tap into Cara a bit more about her insight. In a previous conversation we had, you had some particular insights into the way churches and Christians have been reacting to the whole coronavirus isolation, and they were quite interesting insights. So just in a snapshot, in a minute or less, could you just give us that, what's been your observation in this whole pandemic?
I'm really excited because I think what's actually happened is these sort of divides that were put up between sacred and secular, between church and home or church and work, all those things I think have been broken down, because for the first time since the industrial revolution, we're doing everything from home. We're churching from home, we're working from home. All those barriers that might be there, all those false ways of looking, have actually just disintegrated. They've all become one. And I'm excited about that, because I think those barriers that we put in place are actually false barriers. We need to reclaim that we are made as whole beings. Our faith is part of who we are. Our family is part of who we are. We have different identities, and this sort of sham pretense we've had that we can go to work and leave everything else behind, that needed to be broken down. I think that wasn't real. So I'm excited about the fact that actually we have this opportunity, warts and all, to be everything we are in the one place. I was struck by something that Jill Firth, who's on Ridley faculty, wrote pretty early on, where she's sitting there at home doing church, and she just remarked that, you know, you can't say the confession at home and not start to think about, ooh, what have I done at home to hurt the people around me. It actually makes it much more real and brings that connection. You hear a message and you think immediately about application in your home environment, because you don't switch off on that drive and then re-enter almost as if church has been left behind. So in the same way, I'm hoping that this artificial divide between faith and work has also been partially broken down because
you're going to church in the same place, you're going to work at the same place, you're taking care of your kids in the same zone as well. All of a sudden those universes have collapsed into one space together.
So I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose that, you know, when we go back to normal, because I think normal will be different anyway. But I think it's about integrity, being integral. And I think that's what we've reclaimed.
Yeah, beautiful. That's really exciting to hear. So I would like to go on, but we do need to bring on our next panelist. She's also a powerhouse person. Very excited to have her in this webinar. She's someone I've actually come to know recently because of this whole pandemic. I've really valued her insights, her just a lot of the wisdom that she's been imparting to me via the phone, of course. She is the managing director of leading ConneXions, and she also serves on the board of Ridley, I think for about 8 years now, and that is Sandy Jones. So Sandy, if you're there, if you can join us, she's actually streaming in. Hi, Sandy.
Hi Wayne.
Hi.
Nice to be with you.
Good, thank you. Yeah, so Sandy's actually zooming in from a very rural location. So just in case she might pop in and out from time to time, but I think by God's grace we'll press on and we'll get through with no dramas. So Sandy, I'm just going to bring up my notes here. So what are some of the so you in your work you do a lot of coaching in leadership, you do a lot of training, you do a lot of consultation, not just in the Christian environment, but also cross into business environments as well. So from your perspectives, what are some of the observations that you've seen in how people are readapting to this new era of remote work, shall we say?
Yeah. Yeah, like it's one of the great privileges I have is just to sit with people, to ask questions, to pray with them, to kind of help them process what it is they're facing. And I've found that there's been lots of surprises. So some people who I thought were, really sharp leaders, fairly together, have actually been so thrown by the angst and having to deal with what's going on and processing all the things. And others who I may not have expected to step up in leadership have thrived in this kind of time of crisis. They've found their voice, they've gained a greater confidence. So I think there's been the expected and the unexpected that we've seen in responses. And I thought it may be helpful to think from the perspective of both, what have I observed with individuals, the impact on individuals in teams, and then what are some of the impacts I've observed in teams themselves, if that's helpful. But one of the things I've noticed with some people is that sense of, and I think most of us have found that agility, even if we've gone, oh, this is confronting initially, and some of us have gone, yay, opportunities, great, let's roll with it. I think most people we've seen an openness to rapidly adjust not only what we do, but how we think, how we relate. And so adaptation has become the new norm, and there's been this increased atmosphere of creativity and willingness to try new things. So some individuals in teams who've struggled to keep changing suddenly have gone, actually, I can do this, and gained a sense of confidence, and that's had a ripple out effect on the wider team that they work with. I think for some individuals, there's been a rethinking of priorities. Things that once seemed, utterly vital. This is what we kind of do, and a sense of non-negotiable about in the rhythm of their role. They've begun to see things through fresh eyes, to that step back and go, actually, what is important? What am I doing here? What's the purpose, the why factor, and that rethinking. So people have been more willing, I think, to cultivate an intentionality in reflection, which I think is really valuable.
But these are also principles that have just, like we talk about good leadership and good team management, these are principles that have been around for a long, long time. But,
Precisely.
Unfortunately, it just takes a pandemic for everyone to be on board the same page as well. Am I right to say that?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. I think there's been a growth in intentionality because of the element of being confronted. So you can't kind of push it under the carpet, but needing to deal with it. I think some of the other things that I've observed just from that broader framework of how different individuals reacted, there's been more of an emotional fragility with some people, more buttons pressed more easily, more prone to anger or anxiousness. It's interesting, I was listening to some research coming out from McCrindle Research today. They did some research in April and again in May. And if anyone hasn't had those links, I'm happy to send through later some links to download that, to looking at what are the trends, particularly with teams and leaders, and more broader, that concept of work and worth. But anxiousness was the top of the list when you look at different emotions that people did feel, and they kind of were expressing things of, frustrated, vulnerable, scared, sort of high on the list, and hopeful was at the bottom. Shifting to May is, restrictions are beginning to open up, teams are beginning to think, can we actually come together, even if it's, in a more limited capacity? hopeful has jumped up to number 2. Still anxiousness at the top, but it's shifting. So, and I think that's reflected in some of the coaching conversations that I've had with leaders. The other thing is the link to, I think, trauma fog. I don't know if anyone has ever experienced that sense of a major trauma, and you actually have this fogged brain effect because, you know, you've processed so much. There's no energy to think and process with clarity and kind of conviction, so you tend to procrastinate on things. And so to team members, you may come across as inefficient and work patterns are unreliable, or just not making decisions that have a flow-on effect of others. And I think just growing in awareness that others are going through that, and teams learning to step back and saying, what's going on with my colleagues, not only what's going on with me, and how can we honour one another in what we're facing? How can we learn, well, how is this impacting you, and asking questions and doing the relational thing that Cara was talking about earlier on. So I think most people have been on a real learning curve. We've all done it with technology. I don't think anyone would be able to say I haven't stepped up. But it creates new opportunities of what do we do as team, given those new skills. So I think there's some of the things I've seen with individuals, certainly in teams with team dynamics and productivity.
Could you give us some example of what those team new dynamics could look like?
Yeah, okay. So I think in some of the teams that I've observed, although particularly looking at, say, for example, church teams, so lots of people juggle that remote office and a church office, and they kind of work between, and people focus on, well, I've got this role and task, and separate out into departments. Now they've had to rethink, how do we communicate? How do we function as a team? So they've rethought how they communicate, how they engage, how they do relationally. So in one context I'm involved in coaching, they touch base morning and night. So what's on the radar for you? You know, the water cooler conversations? What's on the radar for you during the day? Quickly praying for one another, very short and briefly, and then touching base at the end. There's been
morning
other
tea for Anglicans.
Yeah. Yes. But others have, you know, put aside time during the day to pray together. Some have had that pattern beforehand and have carried it on through this. There are other teams that have intentionally thought about what actually are the dynamics in our team. How well do we know one another? Discovering actually they don't know one another well. Those that I'm not sure if I'm familiar with Lencioni's model of, cohesive behaviours in team, that you've got to be able to have trust at a baseline level, and to have trust you need those vulnerability-based conversations, being real with one another. You know, I got it wrong, I made a mistake, I'm really sorry. And in order to do that, you then have robust conversations and be able to have unfiltered debate that informs good decision making, and then being able to hold one another accountable and actually get some fruitful ministry and results. And a lot of teams have discovered that things are coming to the surface where there's miscommunications, they haven't known each other's styles. So learning to ask, actually, how do you communicate? How do I best communicate with you? And to deal with some of the tension points that have come up.
So it sounds like a lot of these skills that that's currently high on people's agenda are actually skills that can be transferred once we get out of isolation or remote learning, when we get back to
very much so.
Yeah.
I think it's creating a great opportunity. Quite a number of the conflicted type scenarios that I've worked with in helping people to think through actually what is going on, what's the issue, what's the relational dynamic as distinct from what are the different preferences and priorities, and learning to understand polarities. Even that simple question that is really helpful skill set in teams and in individuals in leading, to say, have we got a polarity to manage because we've got different priorities and preferences, or do we have a problem to solve? Most people assume it's a problem and they've got a conflict, but actually there's a way of navigating through that. So learning to step back and cultivate that curiosity and asking questions.
Yep. That's good. So help me out here. So let's just say I'm a church leader. I'm like a youth ministry leader. I lead a team remotely. At this point of time, what would be a few leadership skills that would be really important for me to hone in to get my team gelling together across the line, what should I be, what learning should be high on my agenda now?
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on something Cara mentioned, and that's actually connectedness. So that's centeredness probably first, centeredness and connectedness. So the relational dynamic with God and one another, but centered first out of Christ. One of the things I've observed is leaders who have a well differentiated, that sense of maturity and are confident in their identity in Christ, and have not lost sight of a focus on that intentionality, have actually been able to step back. So I think out of this, so there's actually a number of things under that. I often encourage leaders to think through, to think through their confidence in their identity in Christ, who we are, our emotional and spiritual health flows from this confidence, rethinking our purpose, what drives us, what we're committed to and why we're engaged in ministry, revisiting that call, that hope. Yep. Thirdly, rethinking through the priorities, and then relationships. So being that centeredness in our identity in Christ, those other things flow out of that. I think relational skills, so soft skills, a lot of leaders don't stop to think, am I touching base with my team? Am I finding out how an individual is tracking? Am I asking them questions? How are they managing? How do they prefer communication? Am I managing what's going on with the team members? So I think good skill set is for team leaders to be being intentional and putting aside time to meet, even if it's a quick touch base on phone, on various other modalities that we've got now and formats, to find out how people are tracking and taking on a coaching mindset. I think if leading teams, we don't kind of tell, we need to help people learn, grow, cultivate that, not lose sight of the learning dynamic as teams and as individuals within teams, and coaching people through problems, and a mindset of how do we empower them. So I think that the sense of the centeredness, the connection relationally with teams and helping them and the coaching of them. And I think another thing is clarity. A lot of people don't pause and think, how are we getting clarity across the board? Clarity on expectations. We talked about polarities earlier on. But I think asking yourself, how well do I know my team members? How well do my team members know one another? How well do they know what's expected of them? Yep. It's a great opportunity to revisit your covenant, if you like, or how you're working well as a team. Yeah. There's lots of things. The one final thing that may be worth touching on is actually in a crisis moment of, everyone's overwhelmed, they're all kind of struggling, and just especially in local churches, I think right across the board, but a lot of church teams have really struggled, especially solo operators with lots more volunteers on teams. I think guarding the culture, now's a great time to rethink what our culture is, but actually being intentional to monitor it, because I think when the underlying principle, so the values that people hold in a team, when that shifts, there's a jarring effect if practice doesn't align with principle, right, if you like. So monitoring and guarding and investing in team culture and having fun together, bringing in that social relational dynamic. I think in the crisis, people said, we've just got to survive this and get through it.
Absolutely.
But actually you need to be together, to enjoy one another, to celebrate, to bring in thankfulness and have those pause moments. There's some of the things. There's lots of other things, but that gives a bit of an overview.
Yeah. So actually, it's a great segue into our next panelist tonight. You talk about work culture, guarding that. You talk about just having fun. Our next panelists that we have lined up are the Bramleys. So it's Katrine and Scott Bramley. So Katrine and Scott, are you guys there?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi. Yeah. Now these guys know how to have fun. I do have to admit. Actually, I'll just make sure that the Bramleys are the big guys on the screen. There we go. Yep. So, for those of you who don't know, Katrine is the chief registrar here at Ridley College, and she also leads a team of registrars. And her husband Scott is the chaplain in the middle school at Carey Baptist. Is that right?
That's correct. That's right.
Wonderful. So Firstly, thank you guys for coming on to this webinar program and sharing your insights. Now, you guys have quite, in one sense, you guys have quite a typical family arrangement in this pandemic, but at the same time, it's also been quite, am I right to say quite hectic, it's crazy around the house, let's just put it out there.
That's a nice way of putting it, Wayne.
Right, yeah, so just for everyone, could you probably describe what your current family, work, living, school arrangements is like at home?
Yeah, so it's recently just changed this week. So we're the parents of three kids. We've got a daughter in year 11, a son in year 7, and a son in year 2. So we've kind of got either end of the educational spectrum at home. But we're finding that the little one needs more hands-on learning, but also the middle one was just starting to gain some study skills in his journey in year 7, and the year 11 just starting VCE has also required sort of a lot of emotional support and just us being there to help support her almost just as much as the little one has. So and Scott and I both work full time, and so we've transferred that to working remotely from home as well. So it's been flat out. This week, the oldest and the youngest have just returned to school. So we're not only homeschooling, but we're also, yes, but we're also managing homeschooling the year 7. Scott and I are still working full time from home. We're also doing school drop off and pick up around that as well. So I sort of said to a colleague earlier today, we thought we were busy before they went back to school, but now we're even busier. So it's been full on.
It's been busier because they've gone back to school, and so you've got to juggle with the to and fro. Is that
correct? Yeah.
Okay. So
in amongst that, Wayne, one of the challenges is that we've still got to continue our full-time job.
Yeah.
And one of the things as an educator for me, I found it really fascinating. I've been able to observe how my 3 kids engage with their particular teachers. And one of the great things about being on conferences and so forth is that a lot of students have this great strategy, and I'm not accusing anyone here, they turn their video off, put themselves on mute, and I've actually caught my own kids going off and making a hot chocolate, lying on the couch, reading a book. I say, aren't you supposed to be in a conference? Yeah. Oh, yeah, someone will cover for me till I come back.
So, yeah, you can't just get them set up on their iPads or their laptops at 8:15 and go, oh, they're right now for the day.
That's right. You're with them all the time. Yeah. And probably the biggest challenge has been we've often got deadlines. We've got to have certain things done by a certain time. But what's happening now is we've found that when we know the deadline is often on the day, you know you've got till 5, but we'll be working days earlier to make sure, just in case something comes up, and we have a little child that says, Mum, Dad, I don't understand this. Can you help us for the morning? And you think, oh, I had planned to do this, but you just got to be very flexible.
Yeah.
Right. So, Katrine, this question's for you. You are leading a team of registrars from home.
Yes.
I to be honest, I actually can't remember when was the last time I saw you in the flesh. So,
it's been a while. Few weeks, actually.
Yeah. So could you maybe just describe briefly what's that been like? Just leading from home with kids in the background.
So it's lots of ball juggling, and I was saying, when we were sort of starting to think about this webinar, the key to success in our house and also with my team has been communication. So being really clear about, when you're free, when you're busy. I was saying at our house, the key to success has been IKEA whiteboards, where every morning we write down everything that, our conferences for the day, not just for us, but the kids, so that Scott and I can sort of juggle, them between us, and also, our Zoom meetings as well, but also for the team. So just, as Diane, Cara and Sandy have all mentioned, just checking in all the time, being clear about how they're going, supporting them with what they're doing, and involving them in like my big tasks as well. So, and where they can support and feed into what I'm doing as well. And so, lots of those things that we've been talking about as, part of our work teams, we're also finding are really applicable to our family team.
All right. Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah. So, being clear and supporting each other, using appropriate communication. And, I think as Sandy was saying, our days might be longer. I'm starting early in the morning to get some work done and just set my day up before, kids get up and conferences start happening. But I'm just sort of being mindful to take the moments of, joy where we're having morning tea together out on the deck in the sunshine, and just
wonderful.
This is a really lovely thing to be able to do that I wouldn't have been able to do if we weren't in lockdown. And just taking the moment to be thankful for that and to enjoy
new
it.
family routines to to celebrate the moments together, being out in the sunshine. Actually, I'm quite fascinated by your comment about the communication culture that you have at work that's reapplicable in the family scene as well. And I think that goes back to what Cara was saying, that whole different personas at work, different personas at home, all that is just starting to merge and melt in together. And that's just very fascinating to watch and hear. Actually, you've covered all the points I was going to ask you. So
one interesting thing, Wayne, I just want to bring in is when you have the opportunity to work away from the home, you have the advantage of that travel time to get home. In a sense, process a lot of what's happening. But what tends to happen that we've found, and the school I've been involved in, we were the first to go out on homeschooling for about 3 weeks before the wider.
Oh, right. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So we've been in lockdown and social distancing a little bit longer than everyone else. We found it, and I've really found it wonderful, where often I'd be dealing with something and then I'd have to reflect on it on the drive home. I can now walk from one part of the house to the other and say, Katrine, how do you reckon I should respond to this email? How do you think I should frame the phone call? What do you think of, and the great one is because a lot of what I do, we still do a lot of pre-recorded chapel reflections. And so poor Katrine has to listen to them all before, where once upon a time she would only hear how it went, not before. So she's actually hearing it before it's delivered rather than a post-delivery. What do you think of that?
Right.
So it's been I've enjoyed every day of it. The hardest thing has been getting the kids to go back to school. And our youngest, we actually had to say, don't worry, if we go into lockdown again, you'll be able to come home. And he goes, oh, it's okay, I'll do that.
But I'm assuming, Katrine, that means your wife roles have doubled as well.
I'm IT, at home IT support as well. But I think I just wanted to touch one moment on the point that Sandy was making about being vulnerable. I found that being really important at in our family team as well, just not to let the pressures and the anxiety that you might be feeling to get work done whilst doing homeschooling or school drop off, not letting it get to the point where you're sort of having a meltdown at home, but sort of remembering to ask for help before it gets to that point, and just showing the kids that it's okay that you're not coping all the time. There's going to be times when you're at a low ebb or you need help, and then it's okay to ask for help, and that those around them will be there to support them and assist.
Excellent.
And we haven't had one. What did you do today, kids? Nothing. We've actually quite detailed. Because
we're much more involved in their day. We know what the structure is, and we've been supporting with it. So it's been really lovely.
Because when we can, we'll listen into the conferences, so we hear the teachers talking. And the sad thing is, we've only missed a couple of conferences, and every time it was when I was supposed to be looking after them.
I wasn't going to make you disclose that.
And we were out in the trampoline instead. But it's amazing. The whole issue of technical difficulties. Schools are very understanding. And when they say, was that technical difficulties because of the trampoline, or technical difficulties taking the dog for a walk? But they understand it. Because you need to break the circuit.
Thanks for those insights. So we're going to actually bring all our panelists back on board now, and we're going to sort of wrap up this segment by just discussing what you guys would like to see Christians retain in this season as we have adjusted into remote learning. What would you like to see Christians retain as we go back into a more normal setting with work? I also just want to make a comment that if you have questions for the panelists, feel free to pop your questions in the Q&A section in the menu at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we'll take your questions to the panelists towards the end of our webinar section. So the question I'm putting to all panelists first is, what good thing would you like to see Christians retain from adjusting to this new remote working environment? I'll start with Diane first.
Yeah, look, it's people have said so many good things tonight. I've been jotting them down and thinking, oh, that's great. But I think one of the first things that sprung to mind for me was flexibility, and I think a couple of people have mentioned that. It'd be great to be able to continue this possibility of more flexibility in the way we work. So, you know, it used to be that if you were just working from home, you were just working from home and that was it. I've heard lots of people now sort of saying, well, perhaps we'll be able to do something like, you know, maybe have a day or two at home and a day or two in the office or in the school or wherever we are. So that flexibility. And the other thing I'd love to see too is this extra creativity that we all seem to have suddenly developed, and this capacity to do things really fast that previously seemed to be impossible. If we can carry through some of that into the future, that'd be great.
Yeah, some of the too hard to do basket list of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Cara?
I would obviously like some of these artificial sort of barriers to stay broken down, that we would be able to be more real in each situation that we're in, take our whole person into each context that we're in. I'm just struck by something Katrine and Scott said, with so much stuff happening and having to go on. One of the things that we have in the Bible is a reminder that our most important boss is God. He's the one that we're actually working for, and he wouldn't ask us to do more than is physically or emotionally possible. So I think sometimes we have to release some of our own expectations of what needs to be done and to be real about that as well. Although it sounds like you've been especially amazing, Katrine.
It's teamwork, Cara.
Amen.
All over the place. Yeah.
It's gorgeous. And I think the other thing I've heard is a lot of people mentioning, just like Katrine and Scott mentioned, that ability to reconnect as family has been something they've really cherished. And I think we need to think about this in our church structures and also in other structures. How programmed have we made our children's lives? Is there a way that we can release some of that programming so that we can have more just natural family time that we can enjoy together? And maybe in church, we're a little prone to do that too. And maybe we need to think more broadly and about that sort of thing. And finally, I think this transition time is really tricky. How do we actually manage this transition time where some are working from home, some are in the office, some kids are home, some kids are at school. At any moment, someone could be forced to go into quarantine. How do we actually manage that? Because I think actually if you're all in lockdown or you're all out of lockdown, that's actually much easier. But this in-between space, even as churches begin to be able to have more people gathering, how do we actually manage some of that?
So it does go back to Diane's previous point about having that flexibility in the work culture is going to be essential moving forward. Excellent. Sandy?
And I want to just echo all of the above. But I think, to pick up your point, Wayne, I think there is a real openness, a keenness to adapt and be different, to not just rest on laurels and say, let's go back to what was. Even the research that came out today through McCrindle, I looked at last month's research and then again today, that trend's being echoed right across society. Right. But I think for me, as well as echoing what I've heard the others say, I'm saying, yep, I'd say that. But I think a couple of things from my perspective is I've glimpsed the pain and sheer hard work, the bruising and battering side in some teams where relational breakdown has happened, or where there's been jarring of different expectations and people trying to work out, how do we navigate through this? How do we understand one another more? And so I'd love to see, you know, passages like, you know, the church teams in particular, but grip Romans 12:10. So, you know, love one another deeply as brothers and sisters, outdo one another in showing honour, you know, and from Philippians, you know, that sense of we're in a partnership with God and one another, and to see the joy of that, but know that it's God who works in us and one another, changing us, growing us, so that discipling edge. So I think for me, I'd want to see the hard work that's been invested relationally, people sustain that commitment to it and still wanting to say, we need to grow in our relationships. The other things that I've seen, two other things. One is the culture of learning we've observed. You know, people have been, you know, yes, they've been zoomed out as they've had to process things in the background and fatigue and things. We're all used to saying that. But I've seen people want to learn, want to grow. Yeah. One of the first things that I actually did, instead of running some training things, was collating resources and setting it up in a digital online library that people could just access those resources. So there's one spot, because I observed that culture, and I'd love to continue to encourage that to grow. So that, and the final thing, people are setting up lots of prayer desks, lots of that, discovering, you know, the rhythm of the daily office for those of them who are into Anglican tradition, or seeing some fantastic creativity in where people have set up outside, inside, but that discipline of spirituality people have captured again in teams and as individuals. And that feeds into that sense of that identity in Christ and that shared partnership of the gospel one with one another, and growing as disciples of Christ, you know, speaking the gospel to one another. And I'd love to see that heightened in moving forward, because I think that will impact the fruitfulness of ministry.
Amen. Agree more. Katrine Bramley's?
Well, that's a pretty hard act to follow. I'm just like Sandy, I've gone like tick,
You
tick,
don't
tick,
say.
tick, tick. That's excellent. I agree. I think, that sense of connectedness, being kind to each other and being gracious about, you know, other people's ideas and opinions, and being aware that, you know, their background and circumstances are different, and just empathizing and figuring out how we can support each other, you know, sometimes on a moment by moment basis, but, you know, as we move forward is, you know, something that I've really valued and something that I'd love to see continue on.
Excellent.
And thinking in a school setting, one of the things I found fascinating is that as Christians, we have such a sense of hope, regardless of what life throws at us and so forth. And so I've actually found that a lot of people who may be not disinterested but highly unlikely to stop and listen are far more interested. And because what I do is I do a recording each week of a reflection and other things in the week. And I've sort of built that in now. Normally we'd have a chapel time, that's can't do that at the moment. And so we've found that actually showing these videos gets kids to really start to ponder and probably unpack their own worldviews, because so often that the catch cries of society, like turn lemons into lemonade and stuff like that, doesn't quite match the reality when you see the terrible news of what was happening in Italy, in England, and in America. They're suddenly saying, wow, actually, this is a big issue. And I've often used a lot of historical evidence of Christians in the past and what they've done, just to encourage kids to think about how they live their life.
Yeah, and I think we've tried to do that too, particularly with, you know, our 8-year-old who got very worried and anxious at the beginning. It was just being very open about being bold about our faith in Christ.
Yeah, God's in control, mate.
Yeah, God is in control. Fully relying on God. It's the Freddo principle, the Freddo frog. So yeah, fully relying on God.
Yeah, and that's what we had to say over and over again.
Yeah,
and he became more at peace. I think there was a lot of sensationalism. We used to have a running gag at home with, like, you'd watch Sunrise and you'd see how many times David Koch could put the word COVID-19 into a sentence and we just count them up. Anyway.
Yeah.
Great, thanks guys. So we're going to take some questions from the floor now. We'll start off with Eugene Chu, who had sent me an email before the webinar started, so he was quite keen to get his questions in to hear everyone's opinion. Again, if you have questions for the panelists, I do encourage you to use the Q&A function at the bottom menu, the bottom Zoom menu at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll try and answer them during the next 10 minutes. So Eugene Chu, he's asked a couple of questions that we probably have addressed, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. So his first question is, where do you draw the line for work and life, especially if you have small children under 7? Unfortunately, working from home doesn't allow you to leave work at home. How do you shut off? We've just heard from the Bramley, so I might just start with let's go with Diane.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. Yeah, look, I'm not in the situation anymore of having small children at home, for which I am actually quite grateful at the moment. But I think, yeah, just some of those things about boundaries and trying to negotiate with the other people in your household. I mean, Scott and Katrine just sort of talked about a lot about balancing things and communicating with each other so everyone sort of knows what's going on. Look, you know, I've been talking to some people and it's just really tough. I mean, I think when your kids are really little, it's much harder to manage stuff and just to sort of structure things in the way that you'd perhaps like to. On the other hand, I suppose, you know, there's those opportunities that Katrine and Scott have also mentioned as well, opportunities just to sort of be in the moment and to enjoy those experiences with the kids. Yeah, I don't think I've got any particularly great insights beyond that. What about anyone else?
I think, sorry, I'm just going to pipe in again for a minute, Wayne. I heard really early on when we started working remotely that it was good to focus on the task, you know, it's not always helpful or it's not, or you're not always able to, but focus on the task, not on the time frame. So just being kind to yourself in that you are juggling so many balls in the air at the moment, and just go, well, this is my task, I'll get it done as soon as I can, but there are all these other things and other balls in the air that I need to take care of as well. And I mean, you know, my experience has been, and I've got an amazing team of people that I work with, they have been so supportive, particularly when I've just said, look, you know, I guess it's making yourself vulnerable again in that saying, well, I'm not going to be able to accomplish this in this time frame. I'm working on it and I'll get there, but you know, it's going to take me longer than it would normally.
I actually, about a few weeks ago, I've read an article written by someone from somewhere. I can't remember everything, but it was basically about how a lot of us that work from home, we tend to guilt trip ourselves a lot, and there is, I guess, there is a need to remind ourselves that we are in a pandemic, we are in unprecedented times. So you know, it's all right just to, you know, cut yourself some slack and look like you're not gonna operate at the same efficiency levels before. So don't be too hard on yourself. Cut yourself some slack and, you know, give yourself a pat on the back.
That's it. I just kept saying, be kind to yourself and be kind to others.
That's it.
What we try and do, Wayne, is like in a perfect world, it would be on a Sunday, no technology. That's not realistic. So we would try and put in certain amounts of time, like perhaps Saturday afternoon, no technology between 12 and 4.
Yeah.
We go outside and do something, and we block in certain times to see if that helps, particularly for the kids, to get them away from looking at a screen.
And us as well.
And that's right, and talking. Don't underestimate too that once the kids go to bed, then you start going to work. So often I'll go back to work at about 9:30 at night and work through till quite late. But I'm more at peace with that because I know then that the next day when I'm with kids, it's actually not work for me. It's just being with my kids, helping them do their work. So I get tired.
Yeah.
Trying the same, but we've done our work. We've done our, well, if you want to go with 8 hours type thing, but we've done it early in the morning or late.
Yeah. That's very helpful advice.
Perhaps I could chime in with a really different perspective.
Sure.
As
And
someone
then, sorry,
who doesn't have...
so we'll take your perspective, and then we'll go to Cara because she put her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Cara.
No, it's all right.
Apologies. So I've over the years really been intentional in relationships with others, and so for probably about a decade I did a couple of days of school runs a week to kind of in community, sharing the load with some close friends and just being a part of that life. But in recent times in the pandemic, I have, some of you may have picked up that there's some kids' books behind me. But my working home office includes every morning doing reading, and so me allocating time to read, do maths for an hour and a half with some kids to give their parents some space to focus on their work uninterrupted. That also means that I get lots of calls from the kids because they're so good at technology and apps throughout the day. So I've had to learn to go, I need to put my work on hold because the relationships are really important, and they're not at 6 and 4, not quite at an age to kind of explain boundaries of work, and I'm in work mode. So being able to take a deep breath and say, unless I have to take a work conference call or a coaching session, being prepared to put aside my deadlines to take their call. They've got such short attention spans, it usually only lasts 10 or 15 seconds with their calls, and then they're off again. But that investing in other relationships, so cultivating close, whether it's family or friendship networks, cultivating friends who are prepared to actually invest in your family and your kids as well and share the load, just as a creative idea.
Yep. I'll go quickly to Cara, but I've got a question for Sandy that will come back to you, Sandy.
Sure. I just wanted to say, just bouncing off what Sandy said, the idea of teaming up so that the other can meet the deadlines as parents. I think what I hear slightly behind that question is we tend to prioritize certain roles. And as I've said, all work in many ways is equal. There are deadlines that you have to make with work, but you shouldn't sort of push down your role, Eugene, as a dad either, that's actually a really important role. And to be able to sort of ensure that you show your value to the kids. If we're constantly thinking, I've got to get this work done and this child is just distracting or annoying or whatever then you're going to get more frustrated. The child is going to get more frustrated and it's just going to explode. But often if we accept that my role as dad is going to take a bit more time here to be able to sort of manage this situation, then and give into it and enjoy it, then it actually frees up some of that tension. But I know a guy who's a grandfather, and so he takes time on a Zoom with his grandkids so that the parents can take a break to get work done. So he'll Zoom in for like a half an hour or an hour. He'll read stories. He'll set some maths problems. He'll watch a program at the same time as them, just to give the parents the opportunity to meet some deadlines. So seeing it as a community effort, I think, is important too.
Great answer. So this question is coming from Ross. And this is for Sandy. Intrigued by Sandy's books, wondering if there is a book on leadership that she and the others would recommend for this time. As a relatively new team leader of a state-based team, I'm feeling a little lost. Sandy?
There's lots of things, especially in starting out. It'd be interesting to know whether the context too is, did you describe what Roz's context was? Is it church-based or wider organisational leadership?
Well, judging by his question, state-based team. Yeah, I'm guessing going to take a bad guess that it's a non-Christian. Sorry, that's all I've got.
Yeah, there's. I think Lencioni's written a number of books, depending on what kind of angle. But I think getting your head around how do teams function well. One of the books, earlier books he wrote was on the 5 dysfunctions of a team. There's been lots of others he's written since, but trying to find out what are ways of understanding how to build relationships with teams, but the underlying systems and who people are and how they function well. And I've just got a mental blank on the name of the book I'm trying to think of, if he's more recent one. But another thing that I found, the reason I asked for context, found really helpful. I've just started reading the more recent edition of Family Systems and Congregational Life, a map for ministry, which applies across different things, but helping to understand how do you become a differentiated, mature person and lead people well. Anything on coaching, helping you to up skills on being a coaching, empowering leader is helpful. I'm happy to take that conversation offline if that person wanted to take it a little bit further and have a quick conversation at some other stage. You can give them my details.
Sure. He or she has clarified and said that he or she's leading a leadership team that oversees 30 locations, but I'm assuming what you've given probably is really applicable. So if so she's clarified that it's a she. So how could this person get in touch with you, Sandy? What's the best way to contact you?
Probably if you will have their email details when they registered, I assume, and I can send them my email address.
Sure. Okay, we'll do that. So here's another question from Jenny Poulter. I wonder if the panel have any wisdom to share for those who live alone and are working remotely. Interesting question. Might be a different dynamic or present different issues to those who live with others. So just to clarify that, it's a question about that you're single, you're living alone. For most of us, we have our spouses, our partners, our families with us. But if you're living alone, how do you cope with working remotely? Cara, you had your hand up first, and I'll go straight to you.
I'm such a good student, aren't I? I noticed Scott had his hand raised as well. Yeah, I think this is really important. So with a couple of single friends that I know, particularly one of them is a teacher, and she's had a really full-on workload. It seems like some people have been pretty unbusy and some people have been ridiculously busy. There doesn't seem to be much of an in-between. But she... So I get together with those 2 friends for Friday drinks, and those drinks could be anything, but it's just an opportunity at the end of the week to tap in with each other, just to debrief, talk about the tensions of the week, talk about what went well, what didn't go well. So just conscious that for them, the end of the week can be a time when they've charged hard and they're feeling sort of a bit empty, and that this would normally be a social time. So the opportunity to socialize online where it's a trusted place where they can just be really real has been really good. I think there's possibly a lot of loneliness out there. It's very socially isolating. So trying to create those opportunities for connection is really important.
Can I add to one of the things that we found, even though we've got a busy house, that one of my roles, we do a tribute each year at Anzac Day to one of our former students. And so this year we decided to print it out and we stuck it on our front fence. And so in the lead up to Anzac Day, I found, and my wife as well, that when we went out at different times, if we were there on our own, often people walking past in groups wouldn't stop, but people who are on their own would always stop and talk to us.
Yeah, we've connected a lot more with our neighbours just in this way and through the pandemic than we have previously, which has been really amazing and exciting.
And obviously having something on the fence gave people that didn't know us something to talk about, and then we could then develop it into other areas of conversation. So we found perhaps if we had both been there, they just sort of kept walking past. But when we went out and did some gardening one on our own, people would stop and talk.
I've got a church friend who lives around the corner. She's single, and she found an excuse to bake some goods and bring it over just so that she could talk to us.
Yeah.
I didn't complain. I had the
Lovely.
I had the biscuits after that.
That's
But
good.
yeah, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Mhm.
So here's another question from an anonymous attendee. You can't just do online what you do in person, and assuming things won't go back to normal. Any ideas for where to look for inspiration in rethinking what teams working together remotely looks like? I'll go to Sandy and then I'll go to Diane.
Sorry, Wayne, I just had a slight issue with the connection then. Could you
That's all
repeat
right.
what you just asked?
So the question is, you can't just do online what you do in person, and assuming that things won't go back to normal, any ideas for where to look for inspiration in rethinking what teams working together remotely looks like?
Yeah, because I actually think teams working remotely are going to be are much more on the agenda. People have experienced it; it's a possibility. You've got all the corporates already saying they're going to. They're not going back till 2021. There are some multinationals that are actually now recruiting whole new departments specifically from remote offices. In church contexts, lots of us have operated remotely for years. I think the key comes back to some of the things I was saying earlier is bringing in creativity to decision making so it remains good process, good thinking. So a lot of people have been learning you can't just have a Zoom conversation. You still have to bring creativity, good process to have fruitful decision making that gets buy-in by all people, good ownership and moving forward. And there's lots of practical tips and tools that you can bring to that. I think those sort of things that we've been on a learning curve for need to go on and not make assumptions. We're used to this. So we still need to bring in a good decision-making cultures. When we do engage, we need to bring in good thinking. How do we guard the culture of how we relate with one another? And we need to still build in good depth of relationships together. And I think for a lot of teams, not just stick with the task, but say, how are we reflecting, spiritually together? How are we praying together? How are we studying the word? How are we listening to God prompting us as a group? I think bringing that intentionality with those things in, with some of the creative tools learned, would be helpful. That's just a couple of things off the top of my head. But intentionality, I think, is the key.
Yeah. Thanks, Cindy. Diane?
Yeah, I think those two themes have come through really strongly tonight, actually, and what most people have said, that intentionality and relationality. So, and they're always important, I think, focusing on the relationships. I mean, there's heaps of collaborative tools that we can use in practical ways when we're working in teams remotely. There's the Microsoft Teams, there's things like Slack, there's Google Docs. There's a whole range of things we can use. I mean, I think I'm sort of trying to apply some of my thoughts here about thinking about teaching and learning online to this context. Because I think one of the things we often try and do is think, how do we do this in the office or the workplace? And then we try and translate that somehow into the online context and make something similar. And it doesn't always necessarily work. So I think that's where we need to be creative and just take that step back and think, okay, well, what are we actually trying to do here? And what are our goals? And try and think of some ways that we might achieve those. And it might not, we don't always have to use Zoom. We might be able to use something else. Just try some different things, I reckon. Be creative. That's been one of the things that's been exciting me. And I think also draw on the skills and the ideas in your team. So sometimes when you're a leader, you feel like you have to be the one with all the answers, but pushing it out there and, as Sandy was just sort of saying, trying to get other people involved and to think about how to make those decisions together is really helpful.
Couldn't agree more. So that was the last question. I think that brings us to the end of our organized time together, as they usually say. Once again, thank you so much to all our panelists for participating, for giving their insights and their wisdom. I really benefited just hanging out with you guys and learned so much from everyone. If you do have questions, more questions for them, feel free to send me a direct email and I'll forward your questions on to specific individual panelists if you want to take your conversations further with them. That being said, here's a short plug. Our next webinar will be on the topic of innovative mission, or rather innovative ideas for the local missional church, and that would be in 2 weeks' time on the 11th of June. We have with us on the panel Stephen Tan, who's the pastor of Regeneration Church, who is a graduate and also sits on the board of our preaching board as well. We have Julianne Ladd, who had worked many years as an AFES worker in Melbourne University, now employed as the Missional Engagement Director at City to City. And thirdly, we have none other than the infamous Jamie Murray, head grappling wrestling coach of Renegade Gym and co-founder of the network Grapplers for Christ. And they will be sharing ideas on how to be missional in your local church context in this current climate. So lots of great value and stuff, and I hope you guys will join us in 2 weeks' time. So till then, I hope that everyone will be safe, that you would be fruitful in the work that you do at home, remotely, or in the office. Until we all meet again in the flesh, go in peace to love and serve the Lord.